Yahshua or Joshua, the first chapter. And Yahweh is showing us that a man operates the law of faith, which tells them that he can call for things, the things that Yahweh has promised him and provided for him in his word. And he operates the law of faith by repeating Bible verses to himself over and over again that tell him what the promises of Yahweh are, and that tell him that Yahweh has provided these things for him. Yahweh also calls this in Yahshua or Joshua, the first chapter, meditating on the word. Joshua, the first chapter, talking about the law of faith and what Yahweh is showing us about the law of faith. Joshua, the first chapter, going to read one verse, verse 8. Joshua 1 and verse 8 reads, "The book of HaTorah, or the law, shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein, Yowm or day, and Layil or night, that thou mayest observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then thou shalt make thy way prosperous, and then thou shalt have tov or good success." So here in Yahshua, Yahweh is telling us that the book of the law, talking about the words that Yahweh dictated and had his people write down and put in what's called in English the Bible, shall not depart out of a man that comes to Yahweh's mouth. So this speaking he's going to show us is also meditating. He said the book of the law, saying what Yahweh put in his word, is supposed to be in a man of Yahweh's mouth. He's supposed to be repeating these Bible verses over and over to himself. He said, and the man is supposed to meditate in this book day and night. Now, when you look at the English dictionary, the dictionary says that meditation is to think deeply or to focus one's mind for a period of time in silence. And then they say you have the option of chanting for religious or spiritual purposes as a method of relaxation. So before a man comes to Yahweh, he thinks that meditation, and I used to think that for years, is just thinking about Yahweh's word. But when we look at the Hebrew definition of meditation, it's just the opposite of what man has said meditating is. They think meditating is just thinking about something, and you're supposed to think about it deeply, but it does not involve saying anything. And when it's talking about chanting, well, they're talking about at least I think it's Buddhist or whatever, because before I knew Yahweh, I had gotten into a little bit of Buddhism over on South Shore, and they would chant this Nam Yam Ho Renge Kyo something, which I don't even remember what it means, but either way, it was just saying something over and over again. But that's what they say meditating is. But let's look and see what Yahweh says it actually is, because he said that these Bible verses are supposed to be meditated on day and night, all the time. Psalm 77. So let's get the true and the real meaning of the word. And that's why it would behoove us not to just stick to what the English version of the word is. The translators did the best they could, but Yahweh dictated this in Hebrew, in another language, and in Aramaic, and Yahweh has given us access to the tools to go back to those languages so we can understand what he really said when he said it. He said it, but it's in another language, so now he's showing us exactly what he said. Psalm 77, and we're going to read verse 12. Psalm 77, and verse 12 reads, "I will meditate also of all thy work, and talk There's the spoken word, the mouth, the law of faith, of thy doings. Talking of Yahweh's doings is talking about the verses in the Bible, repeating what he said in the Bible. And this guy in Psalm says, I will meditate also of all thy work and talk of thy doing. I'm going to go to Exodus, the 20th chapter. So Yahweh says meditation has to do with speaking, opening the mouth and saying. The Hebrew word hagah, used as the English word meditate in Yahshua, the 1st chapter and verse 8, is found at Strong's number 1897 in the Hebrew. And this word in Joshua 1 and 8, when it talks about meditating in the word day and night, is talking about moaning. It's talking about using your mouth, growling, uttering, muttering, speaking. It is speaking what Yahweh said, which is the word, day and night. Not just thinking about the word. Exodus, the 20th chapter. Now sometimes people will quote this verse right here, and they'll quote the first part of it, and they take the meditating in the word in Yahshua, the 1st chapter, day and night, as meaning the English, where you just think deeply about it. Exodus 20, and we're going to read verse 8. Sometimes people will say part of this, and then in their mind, they'll do the same thing that I used to do in Joshua, the 1st chapter, and think that if I thought deeply about Bible verses, I was meditating on them, but I hadn't gone to the Hebrew to look it up. Well, Ruach HaKodesh broke it down in the Hebrew and showed that when I'm meditating Yahweh's word, I'm repeating the Bible verses over and over to myself. I'm not thinking deeply about them. It's more, I'm engaged in a conversation with myself, saying the words to myself. Exodus 20, I'm going to read one verse, verse 8. So this verse gets taken out of context too, and acted on in English rather than in the original language that it was dictated in. Exodus 20, and let's read verse 8. And it reads, remember Shabbat Yowm, or the Sabbath day, to shamar or keep it kadesh or holy. So people will take this verse and they'll tell you, remember the Shabbat day. Well, there's another part to the verse. Using the first part of this verse and thinking it means that all a man has to do is think about the day is the Shabbat day, and he could even be on his secular job. It has led to deception to where the man thinks that he is keeping it because he's thinking about, oh, this is the Shabbat day. But again, that's taking it from the English perspective and not from the perspective that the Creator gave it to us in. The last part of the verse involves the man doing something to show that he recognizes the Shabbat day, and that is keeping it. So then the man needs to go and look and see what Yahweh said when you keep his Shabbat day. And keeping is to observe it, and there are some guidelines and rules and regulations that he set up for the man to know that he is keeping the Shabbat day. Let's go to Psalms, 1st chapter. So, but Yahweh is just showing us, just like the word meditate, people can think that, okay, well, I think deeply about the word, but now this series on the law of faith is showing us that a man's mouth is deeply involved. Not so much his mind, because Yahweh said he has to renew his mind. And the way his mind gets renewed is by him repeating what Yahweh said to him in his word over and over to himself until it gets inside in his human ruach. And then his mind starts to get renewed. Psalms 1 and verse 2. Otherwise, he'll be thinking about these English definitions and think that that's as far as it goes, and he won't open his mouth. And then that's the key to unlocking all of these things that Yahweh is telling us. The spoken word coming out of his mouth, what Yahweh said. Psalms 1 And let's read verse 2. And it reads, "But his delight is in HaTorah, or the law of Yahweh. And in his Torah, or law, doth he meditate day, Yom or day, and Layil or night." So this is saying identical to what he told Yahshua. He's talking about when a man delights in what Yahweh said, and the law is just what Yahweh dictated in his word. We're going back to the same thing, what Yahweh said, which is Yahweh's word. His delight, when it's in what Yahweh said, which is the law of Yahweh, then he'll be meditating or saying it day and night, speaking it, muttering it, groaning, talking about it, day and night, all the time. Let's go to Bereshit 24 or Genesis. So Yahweh says, and Yahweh is always right, and other languages that come from the original Hebrew language, what Yahweh put in this Bible, skim the surface, and they take bits and parts out of the fullness of what Yahweh said. So we want to understand the fullness of what Yahweh said. We're not part people. He's bringing us back to wholeness. He's bringing us out of that fractured state that we have been put into. Yahweh says meditation is not just thinking about what he said, but speaking what he said, which is the word day and night, all the time. We're going to Genesis 24. So now when you see the word meditate, you understand it's not like the people say in the Far East, where you cross your feet in these funny positions and put your ankles up on your thighs, and you're saying some random phrase that they made up, or you're thinking deeply to relax yourself. No, you're repeating, you're saying with your mouth what Yahweh said. Genesis 24, and we're going to read one verse, verse 63. Genesis 24, and verse 63 reads, "And Yitzchak went out to meditate in the field at eventide. And he lifted up his eyes and saw, and behold, the camels were coming." So what is Yitzchak going to do? He's going out to meditate Yahweh's word to himself. He's going out to talk to Yahweh and to talk to himself. He went out to meditate. So he didn't go out to the field to, as we have been trained in English, and to know about the Far Eastern philosophers, to go out to the field to think deeply. He went out to speak to himself, to mutter, to rehearse the words of Yahweh. Go to Psalm 63. This is the same word that we saw in Yahshua, the first chapter, which is the Hebrew word Hagah, found at Strong's number 1897. It means to moan, growl, mutter, speak. Psalm 63. So Yitzchak went out, and in the field he was speaking the words of Yahweh to himself. Psalm 63, and I'm going to read one verse, verse 6. Psalm 63, and verse 6 reads, "When I remember thee upon my bed, and meditate on thee in Halayil, or the night watches." So here again, he's talking about speaking the word of Yahweh, or meditating, or muttering at night. And he's talking about repeating Yahweh's words to himself, which that's what meditation really means. It means to repeat over and over. Okay? Let's go to Psalms 119. Psalms 119. And we're going to read verse 15. Psalms 119. And verse 15 reads, "I will meditate in thy precepts, and have respect unto thy ways." So now that Yahweh has showed us what meditation is, And it's not what the English have defined it as, but what he has defined it as. So we understand, I will meditate in thy precepts means I will speak thy precepts. I will say them to myself over and over. I will talk about what Yahweh said in his word day and night. I will meditate or speak your precepts day and night. I will have respect unto your ways. And so what does that do? That renews me, my mind, that renews the human ruach within me, and that causes me to draw the promises of Yahweh to me. I become built up in my faith. I become more convinced. Why? Because I'm instructing myself like Yahweh said. He said to meditate in his precepts, to say them to myself, the promises of Yahweh over and over again, day and night. Let's go to Psalms 3. Talking about the law of faith. And Yahweh is showing us that it involves our mouth confirming and saying amen or so be it to what Yahweh has said. Psalms 143. And we're going to read verse 5. Psalms 143. And verse 5 reads, I remember Hayam, or the days of old. I meditate on all thy works. I muse on the work of thy hands. So we saw from this Hebrew word Hagah in Yahshua or Joshua 1 and 8, that meditating is musing. It's also speaking. So he said, I will remember the days of old and meditate on all Yahweh's works. What is he doing? He's talking about Yahweh's works. He's repeating Yahweh's works. He's rehearsing Yahweh's works. He's saying what Yahweh said in his word. Go to 1 Timothy, the 4th chapter. And this is where when a man comes to Yahweh, Yahweh shows him that he has to get his mouth in order. And he has to start speaking right. He has to start speaking like Yahweh tells him to speak, and that is saying the words of Yahweh. Otherwise, Yahweh calls it evil speaking, and he calls it perverse conversation, and he calls it converted speech. But he wants us to speak wholesome words, because he says wholesome words are health to your body, and they're good for you, and they bring to you the things that Yahweh has promised you. 1 Timothy 4, and we're going to read verse 15. And so he's just telling you how speaking, and again, meditating, we have to throw out that English definition, which means think deeply. Meditating is speaking. It's talking about. It's rehearsing. It's saying over and over. 1 Timothy 4, and we're going to read one verse, verse 15. 1 Timothy 4 and verse 15 reads, meditate upon these things. Give thyself wholly to them, that thy profiting may appear to all. So what is he talking about meditating? He's talking about what Yahweh said in his word. What he dictated, gave to his people to write down. And now because we're his people, we're reading them. And we're not only reading them, but he calls us, he says that we eat his words. They're becoming a part of us. He said, meditate, speak these things, give yourself completely to them, what Yahweh said. Give yourself wholly to them. And he said, what's going to result is that people will see you, and you will profit from giving yourself wholly to them, from operating the laws, the spiritual laws that Yahweh has let his people know about, let you know about. And he said it's going to produce a difference between you and somebody that doesn't know Yahweh. That is, when you give yourself wholly to them, and when you're speaking and rehearsing and saying over and over what Yahweh said. Go to Romans the 10th chapter. Romans the 10th chapter. I'm going to read one verse. Verse 17. Romans 10 and verse 17. Now this is the law of faith, where Yahweh is breaking it down for us and telling us how faith, or believing what Yahweh said, how it comes to a man after he comes to Yahweh. Romans 10, and we're going to read verse 17. Romans 10 and verse 17 reads, "So then immunah or faith cometh by shamar or hearing, and shamar or hearing by hadabar or the word of Elohim." So he's saying this is how a man comes to believe what Yahweh told him. He may not believe it the first time, but when he says it to himself over and over again, he builds up his belief in it. And he builds up his belief in it. And he builds up his belief in it. And Yahweh showed us this is how he plants the word within himself. That the planting of the word has to take place by the man hearing it over and over again. And where he's planting it is, he's planting it in his inner man, which is his human spirit, his human ruach. Let's go to 2 Peter, the 1st chapter. So meditating or speaking the word to himself causes a man to see the entrance or doorway to receive Yahweh's promises. 2 Peter, the 1st chapter. Meditating or speaking the word over and over to himself to plant it in his human ruach causes a man to see the entrance or doorway to receive Yahweh's promises. And the law of faith says that he sees it first in his human ruach. And he starts to see it by saying the word to himself over and over again. And then Yahweh says, then there's an entrance that he starts to see. Then there's a door that starts to appear in front of him. But it only comes after saying the word to himself over and over. It's a process. And Yahweh gave us the example of farmers and farming to see that he told us that Yahweh's word is the incorruptible seed, and that is what a man plants in his human ruach, and that is what he keeps planting, and that is what starts to grow. And then he says, all of a sudden there starts to be an entrance that appears to the man. All right, 2 Peter, the 1st chapter, let's read about it. 2 Peter 1. And we're going to read verse 10. 2 Peter 1 and verse 10. He sees it in his human ruach first. And let's read verse 11. I'll skip verse 10. Let's read verse 11. 2 Peter 1, and we'll read verse 11. And it reads, "For so an entrance shall be ministered unto you abundantly into the everlasting Malkuth or kingdom of our Master and Savior, Yahshua Mashiach." So here it's talking about there's an entrance, there's a doorway, that when a man of Yahweh rehearses the words of Yahweh and says them to himself, it says there's an entrance that's ministered unto him, that's given to him, that's opened up to him. It says an entrance ministered unto him abundantly into what? Into the kingdom. Yahweh has showed us in this series of Law of Faith that we have been translated, or a man after he comes to Yahweh, he's translated from the kingdom of darkness, which is Hasatan's kingdom, which is the kingdom that the rest of the world is in. He's been translated into the kingdom of light, or Yahshua's kingdom, or Yahweh's kingdom. And so now, saying the words of Yahweh, operating in that kingdom, he starts to see an entrance. It says he's given an entrance. Those words staying alive in his mind, him thinking about him, talking about him, all of a sudden now it starts to be doorways that are open to him that wouldn't be open to him if he weren't saying those words to himself. Okay? He said an entrance shall be ministered or provided or shown this man into the everlasting kingdom of our Master, which is Yahweh, and our Savior, Yahshua Mashiach. Verse 12. Wherefore the rather, Ak, or brethren, give diligence to make your Korah or calling and election sure. For if ye do these things, ye shall never fall. Saying the word to yourself is making your calling and election sure. Yahweh tells us that he called people, then those people have to be chosen, then they also have to be faithful. Being faithful by saying what Yahweh said, confirming the word, speaking it to yourself, is making your calling and election sure. Yahweh called, we answered, now it's up to us. What are we going to do? All right, let's go to Yochanan or John, the 10th chapter. So Yahweh's telling us to make your calling and election sure. He said, be diligent. Go after it. Be diligent, be consistent, be steadfast, get better at it. John 10. And he gives us this knowledge so that we can get better at it. And understand exactly what we have been called to and exactly what we have access to. And so many of Yahweh's people don't understand the things that he have given them that they have access to, and don't know how to reach out and take what he has given them. And Yahweh has shown us in this series, this law of faith, that just because Yahweh has given his people things, they don't fall out of Shemayim, they don't fall out of heaven on them. They're not automatic. And we use the example, just because salvation has been provided to the whole world, just because Yahshua died for the whole world, that doesn't mean that everybody is saved. The man has to step up, and he has to receive salvation, and he has to admit that Yahshua died for his sins. So Yahweh has provided things for his people, but they're not received automatically. There's something the man has to do. And one of the main things the man has to do first is get some knowledge about what's been provided. Then, okay, it's been provided, so how do I get it? How do I receive it? And this is what Yahweh is doing for us. He showed us how to receive salvation. Now he's saying this is what salvation is about. This is how you receive the rest of salvation. You understood, you repented, you were baptized in the name of Yahshua. So you receive salvation, and you know to keep Yahweh's laws, statutes, and commandments, and to please Yahweh, to protect that part of salvation. Now, that's not the only thing that was provided in salvation. So he's showing us how to receive the rest of it. Okay? And to see that doorway that's been opened into the everlasting kingdom. All right, we're in Yochanan, the 10th chapter, and we're going to start at verse 7. John 10. And let's read verse 7. And it reads, Then Amar, or said Yahshua unto them again, Verily, verily, I Amar, or say unto you, I am the door of the sheep. So we're talking about the same entrance, this doorway, that a man starts to see after he's rehearsing and saying the words of Yahweh to himself over and over again. Then Yahweh lets him start seeing this doorway into his kingdom. We've been translated out of the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of light. And so we can operate in the spirit world now, but we need knowledge about how to operate in the spirit world. And Yahshua is saying, I'm the door, I'm the entranceway. And he explains to us exactly how to go through that door and to bring back out the promises that Yahweh has provided us. We're not trying to get anything that Yahweh has not given us already. All we're doing is getting understanding about how to get what Yahweh has given us. So he's already said, yes, you can have these things. Now, Yahshua is explaining to us how to get them, because they're not just dropped out of Shemayim onto us. Okay? Let's read verse 8. John 10 and verse 8. All that ever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not shamar or hear them. So now he's saying that the sheep have to hear, which means to comprehend and to understand and to be able to put to use the words that Yahshua is instructing them. And that takes instruction, and that it's not something that we may get the first time. That's why he said, keep saying the word to yourself over and over again, and then you will get it. It's just a matter of time. It's not if, it's just when. All right? He said you have to be diligent. You have to go after it. He said, all that ever came before me, they're thieves and robbers. But the sheep didn't hear them. We don't hear those people. We're going after Yahweh. We're following Yahweh and Yahshua. And that's who we hear. Verse 9. I am the door. By me, if any Adam or man enter in, he shall be saved, and shall go in and out and find pasture. That pasture is talking about going into that entrance that's been provided him. He'll go in and he'll find all the promises that my Father has provided, and he will enjoy those promises. People sing these songs about what they're going to have after they leave here. Well, Yahweh provided a lot of stuff for us right here, because we use that example. If you have a car, you don't need gas when you go to the kingdom. You need money and you need stuff to buy gas here on this earth. And Yahweh understood that, and he's provided it for us. All right, so he's explaining how we can go get that. Yahshua said, I'm the door. By me, if any man enter in, he shall be saved. And he'll go in and out of these doors, and he'll find pasture. He'll get exactly what he's looking for, exactly what he's standing on Yahweh's word for, exactly what he went in the Bible and found verses on. Are repeating those verses to himself, because that's what he needs in this life. Then he'll go in and out that door, and he'll find that pasture. He'll find those very things that he is standing on the word for. Let's go to 2 Corinthians, the 9th chapter. So this entrance or doorway into what Yahweh has provided, that means that he's given, he's provided, he's furnished, and presented to a man how to open the door by speaking Yahweh's words. This entrance and doorway is directly connected to the words that a man receives from Yahweh. And the more word the man receives, the wider these doors open. 2 Corinthians 9. And then Yahweh gives the man more word. And conversely, if a man rejects the words that Yahweh gives him, he doesn't get more word. Yahweh doesn't give more word after rejection. He gives more word after acceptance. 2 Corinthians 9. And let's read verse 10. 2 Corinthians 9 and verse 10 reads, Now he that ministereth seed to the sower, both minister lechem or bread for your food, and multiply your seed sown, and increase the fruits of your tzedakah or righteousness. So here is the principle Yahweh has shown us of the law of faith, where Yahweh uses these agricultural principles because he wants us to look at the natural world so we can understand how sowing seeds, how the spiritual world works. He that ministers seed to the sower. And again, Yahweh told us that his word is a seed. He calls it the incorruptible seed. And he said, look at how the farmer plants a seed in the earth, and the seed, it buds and it grows and it becomes whatever the seed is. And Yahweh showed us that we don't have to do anything to make the word do what it does, other than plant it.
Exactly.
That's how it multiplies. The ability to reproduce, just like the farmer puts the seed in the ground, is in the seed. The ability to reproduce is in Yahweh's word already. And Yahweh said all we have to do is plant it. So that's why he's saying, he that ministers seed, he's given us word now. To the sower. We are the sowers. Where are we sowing? We're sowing within ourselves mainly, and we're saying the word and sowing within other people. Sowing is just another word for planting. When you're planting something, what you're doing is you're saying the word. The same thing as meditating. You're speaking the word, and you're just rehearsing it over and over. He said, the one that ministers this seed to the sower, those that take the word and plant it, both minister bread for your food. Why? Because repeating the word to yourself, if you're lacking something, then you're going to go in Yahweh's word and you're going to find a verse that says, my Elohim supplies all of my needs according to his riches in glory by Mashiach Yahshua. I am abundantly supplied. I have no lack. I'm blessed going in, blessed coming out. These are all Bible verses that Yahweh has told us, told a man after he comes to him, this is how you are. And the way you get that into your life is you say the same thing Yahweh said. And you keep planting it in yourself, and eventually it comes to you because you're pulling it, you're calling it out of the spirit world. He's saying that is as simple as that. You're not doing it, but speaking it is involved in doing it, but it's the word being planted in you that's doing it. And the word doesn't fail. Yahweh said, whatever I sent my word to do is going to do. You take Yahweh's word, you say the same thing Yahweh said about his word, it's foolproof. All he said is just you plant it. He said, look at the farmer. He doesn't counsel the corn seed or the bean seed and say, okay, now look, I'm going to put you in the ground. Now this is what I want you to do. I want you, when I water you, I want you to come up and I want you to do this. He doesn't have to tell the seed that. He doesn't have to tell the seed. All they have to do is put it in the ground. Same with Yahweh's word. Yahweh's saying, you don't have to instruct my word on what to do. It knows what to do.
It knows.
But now, man has been ignorant about knowing how to plant it. He's been ignorant about knowing that it was his mouth that was to plant it. To plant it, and he's been ignorant about the fact that it was to be growing up in his ruach. He said that the man's human spirit is the ground that the word gets planted in. Okay? He said, he ministers seed to the sower, and he will minister bread for your food, because that's where you get your food from, sowing that word about the things that Yahweh has provided for you, and he'll multiply your seed that's sown or your seed that's planted. That's how it multiplies, by planting it. I remember we had used an example, I believe, in this series where there were some villages in poorer parts of the world, and the people didn't know that they would give them like sacks of seed, and they were hungry, and they didn't know that they were supposed to plant them. So some of the villages, before they could tell them what to do, they would take the bag of seed and give it to their family, and they would eat it, and then they would still be hungry. Right. So finally they realized, wait, these people are still starving, what's going on? Well, they didn't understand they had to plant it in order for it to multiply. But eating this 2 or 3 bags of seeds, well, that's all they would have. But they didn't understand that principle. And then once they got them, okay, look, plant this, and then they had to guard the field so they wouldn't go in there and dig it up. Once it started growing up, then multiplied, and then it stopped the hunger in those villages. But again, it was just a lack of understanding, a lack of knowledge, kind of like we've had, all right? But if they just ate the seed, that's all they would ever have, all right? Go to Galatians, the 3rd chapter. And Yahweh wants us to understand, and he wants us to be working, and he wants us to receive what he's provided for us. And that's why he's telling us, Galatians 3rd chapter, how to take his word and work it. Galatians 3, and let's read verse 5. Galatians 3 and verse 5 reads, He therefore that ministereth to you Ruach, or the Spirit, and worketh miracles among you, doeth he it by the works of Torah, or the law, or by Hashemar, or the hearing of Emunah, or faith? So this is the question. How is this done? Is it done because we read Yahweh's word and he tells us this is how you do it, and then we believe it and we do it? Or he said, is it done another way? He said, he that ministers to you the Ruach and works miracles among you, how does he do it? By a jot and tittle, by a method? Like one guy says, well, you know what, speaking Yahweh's word doesn't work. I said 300 times, in one day, that I believe Yahweh gave me a new car. And I said it 300 times that day, and I didn't get a car. It didn't work. Well, he missed the whole point. He didn't get it. It's not that saying it brings it to you. It's that Yahweh has said it. Your saying it is involved in you getting it. But this is not a a get-rich-quick thing. This is a spiritual principle that you're working. And number one, you have to believe what Yahweh said, and you have to understand it's a process. The farmer doesn't plant the seed today and then go dig it up tomorrow and he's got a crop. If he digs it up tomorrow, he won't have anything. Yahweh showed us in this series that the man plants the seed, he says the word to himself, and he gets up night and day. He goes about his business night and day, and he's daily planting the seed, and he lets things transpire in the spirit. And the first person he has to build up in faith is himself to believe the word. Amen. It's a process. Let's go to 2 Peter, the first chapter. So what's the question? Do we do this thing by believing Yahweh? Or do we do it because there's a formula? If I say 300 times in one day that Yahweh supplies all my needs, and bam.
Can't mix logic with spirit.
Exactly. It is not, it's a principle, but it operates the way Yahweh said. Amen. Not because a man can say something 1,000 times a day and push a button. 2 Peter 1. So to enter the doorway that Yahweh has talked about into the everlasting kingdom, a man calls for the promises. 2 Peter 1. We're going to read verse 5. 2 Peter 1. And verse 5 reads, And beside this, giving all diligence, add to your Emunah, or faith, virtue, and to virtue, yada, or knowledge. So this involves knowledge, and Yahweh said, look at the natural world so you can see how spiritual things work. And he said, it's a procedure, it's a process, and what man is doing by repeating the verses to himself is he's renewing his mind. And that takes time. And once his mind is renewed, once he believes Yahweh's word, then he's able to see that door and that entrance is ministered to him. And it's not because he repeats it so many times to himself. It's just that this is how it's done, by saying the promises to himself. Go to Romans, the 4th chapter. To enter that doorway, he has to call the promises by using his voice. But it's not the fact that he has to use his voice to call them. That's not what makes the promises sure. The promises are sure because Yahweh's divine DNA is in his word, and his word works. In Romans, the 4th chapter. And when you're saying that the word will do what Yahweh said it will do, is going to do it. And you had the incidental part of speaking it in this earth realm. Romans the 4th chapter. And I'm going to read one verse, verse 17. Romans 4 and verse 17 reads, "As it is written, I have made thee a Abba or Father of many or nations, before him whom he believed, even Elohim, who quickeneth Hamuth or the dead, and Kara or calleth those things which be not as though they were." So here we're looking at how Yahweh does things, and he's breaking down again the law of faith. This is how people that come to Yahweh do things. They don't, like we use the example about where people say the news, which is really the olds, because they're calling stuff that already happened. Yahweh, as his word says, declares the end from the beginning. He calls things before they happen. And he's saying, man, after you come to me, I'm going to show you how to do the same thing. Call things before they happen. You don't have to wait until they happen. I've given you the ability, and I'm showing you and explaining, I'm giving you the knowledge to know how to do that, to call things before they happen. Go to Yachanan or John, the 1st chapter. So when a man calls for the promises, when he voices them out and he speaks the words of Yahweh, there are eternal spiritual forces that open up to a man. That because Yahweh's word is Elohim, they overcome the seen world. So whatever is going on in a man's life, when he calls for the promises, or the way Yahweh said things are supposed to be for him or her after they come to Yahweh, then he has his hands on some spiritual forces that before he came to Yahweh, he didn't have access to. He couldn't work. But he can work them now. And the reason is because Yahweh said his word is Elohim. And we're going to see, well, what does it mean when his word is Elohim? There's a person where he said that their name was Elohim. And Yahweh also has shown us in this series that his word is Elohim. Yachanan or John 1. And then we're going to read one verse. John 1. And we're going to read verse 1. And it reads, "In Ha-Bereshith, or the beginning, was Ha-Dabar, or the Word. And Ha-Dabar, or the Word, was with Elohim. And Ha-Dabar, or the Word, was Elohim." Now it's saying in the beginning, there was the Word. We got a capital word. This is talking about a person. And we understand that the word, person, was Yahshua. So now, it not only said with this person Yahshua, his name was the Word. It not only said that his name was the Word and he was in the beginning, but it said he was with Elohim.
Right.
Then it says he was Elohim. So the Word was Elohim.
Amen.
The Word is Yahshua. And the spoken word is also Elohim. Going to go to Genesis, the 1st chapter. So the word was Elohim, the word being Elohim, the spoken word, not only the person, the word, but the spoken word meant that a word that was uttered by a living voice was Elohim. A word that embodied a conception or idea, what someone said, the spoken word, the sayings of Elohim. A decree, mandate, or order of the moral precepts given by Elohim. All of this was Elohim in the beginning. The Old Testament prophecy given by the prophets. What is declared, a thought, a declaration, a saying, the act of speaking, speech was Elohim. The skill and practice in speaking, a kind or style of speaking. Instruction, doctrine was Elohim. Teaching was Elohim. Anything reported in speech was Elohim. And Yahweh never uses the word as respect to the mind alone. Again, just like with meditation. People say meditation, you think deep and you don't really say anything, you're silent. Yahweh never used it in that instance. When he's talking about the word, he's talking about saying something. So the word being Elohim, we're in Genesis, the 1st chapter, means that Yahshua is telling man, because he is the word, how it always was since the beginning. This is how it always was. It didn't just start with the creation of the earth. We don't know how many creations there were before this creation. But the word being Elohim, Yahshua being the word, and then him speaking the word, which was also Elohim, the spoken word, it didn't just start with the creation of the earth. It has always been that way in the spirit realm. And he started out demonstrating how it always was right here in Genesis. And then just note that nothing happened until that word was spoken. Nothing happened until the word was spoken. Genesis 1, and we're going to read verses 2 and 3. So he's demonstrating how it always was. This is how it has always been in the spirit realm. The word precedes everything. Everything comes out of the spoken word. That's what it means that the word was Elohim. We know the word was a person, but we also, Yahweh is getting us to understand that the word, speaking it, is on top of everything. Speaking it was always first. And it's always been that way. Genesis 1, and let's read verse 2. And it reads, "And Ha-Eret, or the earth, was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And Ha-Ruach of Elohim moved upon the face of Hamayim, or the waters." Verse 3. "And Elohim said," now you see verse 2, the Ruach is moving upon the face of the waters. It's moving. Nothing's happened yet. Verse 3, "And Elohim said, let there be or light. And there was or light." After he said it. This is the spiritual principle that has always been since the beginning. Yahweh is always, nothing happens until he says something. And when you go throughout the Bible and you looked, and Elohim said, or Yahweh said, nothing happens until he says it. And he's saying it throughout the book. Because that's always first. Everything came from the spoken word. It starts everything. Both seen and unseen. All right? Let's get down to verse 6. Genesis 1 and verse 6. And it reads, "And Elohim said, let there be a firmament in the midst of Hamayim, or the waters, and let it divide Hamayim, or the waters, from Hamayim, the waters." And then you read 7 and 8, and you see it came after he said it. Saying it always comes first. And he's demonstrating how it has always been. And he's showing man. He wants man to get it. He started out in the first chapter of the first book, instructing and teaching man, this is how you do it. You call it first. You call it. Don't be like Hasatan has everybody backwards. After it happens, then he has them repeating and rehearsing. And again, Like the Ruach said, they even have this thing where they call it news, but it's old. They're just saying what already happened. And then people look at you like you have a screw loose when you do what Yahweh is telling you to do, and you call it before it happens. Why? Because everything got turned upside down in the garden, and they started doing things backwards. He's showing us the right way to do it. Skip down to verse 9. And it reads, And Elohim said, Let Hamayim, or the waters, under Hashemayim, or the heaven, be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And so then we see the dry land appear. And you can read on down. You can read verse 11. You can read verse 14. You can read verse 20. You can read verse 24. And then we're going to go to verse 26. So the word, which was Yahshua, said the word, which was a spoken word, that man would be made in Elohim's image, his likeness, and that he would have dominion. How were they to have dominion? The same way that Elohim had dominion, by speaking the word. Verse 26 and 27, this is going to be our last verses this week. And verse 26 reads, And Elohim Amar, or said, Let us make Adam, or man, in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all ha-eret, or the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon ha-eret, or the earth. Verse 27. So Elohim bara, or created Adam, or man, in his own image. In the image of Elohim bara, or created he him. Male and female bara, or created he them. So you see, Elohim said, let man have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air. So he's calling for man to have these abilities, these authorities.